and welcome to the Shelly Show. I'm Shailendra and you're watching this simulcast live on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. Yeah, I think that's it. I hope you and your family are safe and are staying indoors due to COVID and not going out. For you to view this episode and other sessions that are run on emerging technologies live, I would request you to follow me. If you're watching on Twitter, press the follow button. If you're watching on YouTube, press the subscribe button and the bell icon. And if you're watching on Facebook, then you can like this video and also share this video with other groups by sharing it across so that more and more people can learn from this particular episode that we're having and for maximum reach. So thank you all for watching this episode. Today, we're going to talk about the bias in AI. Human biases are well documented. From implicit association tests that demonstrate biases we may not have been aware of, to field experiments that demonstrate how much these biases can affect our outcomes. Over the past few years, society has started to wrestle through with just how much these human biases can make their way to artificial intelligence systems as well, with harmful results. At a time when many companies are looking to deploy AI systems across their operations, being acutely aware of those risks and working to reduce them is an urgent priority for everyone. So today we will talk about bias in artificial intelligence and how that has been driving various outcomes and some startups as well. So first, let me know whether you're watching this live or you're watching it on a replay. Just mention that in the comment section if you're watching live or replay, and that will give us a fair good idea that where my audience is coming from. Welcome to the eighth episode of Artificial Intelligence Startup Series. In this series, we discuss about artificial intelligence and how startups are leading the space. We're joined by Marc Teerlink, who's the SAP's Global Vice President for Intelligent Enterprise Solutions and Artificial Intelligence. Marc is active in the startup community as an angel investor, mentor, and a board member. So makes him more relevant to this conversation. So without any further ado, let me bring in Marc to the show. Hi, Marc.
Hey.
Welcome to the...
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody.
How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for when you're in the West Coast in the US and you're staying up and it's around 10 o'clock for you now, joining this. We really appreciate this. When you are in Australia or Singapore and you're having fun at this moment, you're taking a break out of your lunch to join. Thank you again. When you're early up in Western Europe, I am grateful.
Marc, one thing that has changed from last week, there has been a daylight saving change in Australia. So earlier we were going live at 3 p.m. Now we're going live at 4 p.m. So from today, we've changed by an hour. That will also be an interesting thing to see what happens to the audience from 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. Does it make a huge difference or not? But, it's a good thing to see. And that also will explain the bias, because the way artificial intelligence works is on the basis of the data that it has got, which makes it much more biased on what it has seen in the past. So let's start with the conversation. What do you think about the bias in machine learning algorithms, which is the brain of AI processes?
So the what they call ethical AI, right? So the whole part around bias is risen to be a serious discussion in the last 3-4 years. I think when I was with IBM and was part of the Watson team, this was one of the biggest discussion we had, right? And we discussed about how do you, I don't want to use the word commercialize it, but make it part of your product, that it's actually an important piece of insight. So you first have to show, of course, how much can I trust the outcome? And that's not always about accuracy, it's also about confidence. And there's a big problem, right? I can have a high accurate result, but I can have a low confidence in the recommendation. I can have a high confidence in the recommendation, but I can actually have a very limited set of data to base my conclusion on. So the discussion, of course, was and became bigger when we had the Cambridge Analytica situation, how Facebook used literally data and algorithm to tweak and to give you information that would lead you in a certain direction. And the concept of fake news, for a better word, is of course partly driven by there's this phenomenal book, Algorithms of Mass Destruction, and by this, which showed how where normally you and I made a statement that wasn't really strong or correct or total BS, we had so many people we could touch. But now with an algorithm, we could touch people, would spread people, and in nanoseconds, we could actually get a non-accurate and certainly low confidence piece of information through, because the algorithm was tweaked to do that. Now we have seen this really even worse with ads, for instance, that ad engines, not necessarily with malintent, right? But again, for those that are interested in the literature around it, right? I mean, there's been some serious publication how certainly in the 2010, 2015, and still today, to be honest, companies like Google in their search engines, not intentionally, not with malicious intent, nevertheless, the wisdom of the crowd, all the things we type in, right, tweaked algorithm in such a way that it wasn't the most comfortable outcome. And algorithms of mass or algorithms of let me remember the job book title in a second again. I'll come back to that. But the whole point was, when you looked at that, right, you get typical examples, whether it is grown by what you and I do, how we interact, right? You and I make a joke once and we know each other and it's in context. So you can make jokes about white guys with glasses. I can make jokes about Indian guys living in Australia. And because we're friends and in our personal context, right, we don't feel offended. But once it becomes words on the internet and it gets repeated, it trains an algorithm. And it takes that context of trust between you and me out, that there was no malintent and hurt, and maybe it was a bad joke, and maybe in 2020 we shouldn't make those jokes anymore, and stereotype people. But the algorithm has now been trained. Like when you go to a search engine like Google and you say lawyers are, you get a bunch of words that are not really the most pleasant association with the job. And it is a subjective, what do people think of lawyers that train that algorithm? So coming back to AI and bias, everything we do daily in our digital interaction creates some bias in some algorithm. That can be a very innocent bias. That can be the bias of when I get messages in from my wife, I want you to block them, and I get messages in from my coworker, I want you to show them. And therefore the bias is work is more important than family, which might not always be true, right? It might just be in this meeting, I only want to get messages from X or Y. A famous setting is the do not disturb mode. Who of my favorites can bother me when my phone is on disturb? But it trains an algorithm, a very simple one, and one that you and I can correct. And then when it happens, we can directly trace it back to what were my settings? Who were the people that could bother me? So you can actually see the bias you build in, you can correct it directly, and you have created transparency.
Yep.
The holy grail is, of course, that an app or a piece of software shows you, how did I come to the answer? What was the data sources that I got? Who are the people that trained me? I've said this before, it makes a big difference if you get the top 5 cardiologists or 5 residents. It makes a big difference if you have some people that are blocked into a building or people with 25 years of industry knowledge, right? The best example is when we get Google Translate, and I don't want to hit on Google, but these are some broader examples, and Bing Translate isn't on that level yet. When you take Google's Translate, and for those that speak Spanish, right, we take the whole adjective part and the part that describes the noun, his house, her house, actually follows the gender of the house. So it would always be su casa.
Yep.
And right, the issue is when you go to other languages, we follow the gender. So the man, his house, the woman, her house. If you have like the 90s and we trained an algorithm and you had a lot of white engineers and you had a serious bunch in Silicon Valley at that moment of people of Indian descent and Asian descent already, but they were all men and they trained an algorithm. So you then automatically get these translations back to English. The woman, his house, right? Or the woman went to his house and like, oh, did she go to the boyfriend's house? Did she go to the husband's house? No, she went to her house, right? And these are the really little things. And it has nothing to do that all these people are malintended, but the algorithm was trained to the default of how you and I thought, and we are men, right? And this is a really good example. And I really like the book Algorithms of Oppression, it's called, NYU Press. And it's man, algorithms of mass destruction, algorithms of oppression. There's a lot going, right? So the first question is, when you start testing your data and you start creating the model, is who's training it? What data do I use? How do I make this as transparent as possible without, of course, getting other issues with the confidentiality of my training data, etc.?
Mhm.
And then how do I show the confidence and the accuracy in this answer, right? So in medical training, you say, well, what is your best of 5? Which one do you have most confidence in? How did you come to the answer? I read these books, I look at this data, etc. How trustworthy is this data, right? It's the same story in medical situations again. When you're a woman, or when you are genetically not Caucasian, most clinical trials about heart failure and heart disease and repeat heart attacks are based on clinical trials for men, white men, between their 20s and their 50s that were done in the 70s to the mid-90s. And most doctors have been trained on that. So knowing that as a physician, I can already say, hey, I'm using some biased data. This data is just a bias to men, right? Or there are some assumptions here. So I probably need to do some extra work. Or the confidence, if an AI would be, you say, well, the accuracy of my finding is pretty high, but the confidence I have isn't that much because your patient doesn't meet all the criteria for my training data because she is not she's not a man. And in that, you and I, or people that are medical trained when they didn't use AI, but they had residents, right, would tweak things. Now, the hardest holy grail has been, it's great to take the moral high ground that we want trustworthy algorithms, that we want our answers to, computer says no, and those kind of things, that we want the answers of our algorithms to be good. How do I build this in my product, and how do I justify the extra price? I'm not even saying commercialize it, right? But why would I do that? And by the way, it also creates a problem, because if you give consumers and say, well, this is how Amazon, eBay, one of the larger global platforms, AliExpress, came to the conclusion, you left this cookie, you did this, you did that, and therefore I am recommending you to buy this. Like, oh. And then the second is, Shelley, would you want your wife to know, I used the cookies because you were at this site and you read this book, and you're like, oh.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me ask you this question, Mark. When I was running a business, I heard the term AI bias, and it was given to me by my boss and said, how do you fix that? And if you look at the real reason, or what actually happened was, we were running a campaign to target all the customers who were likely to eat meat. So now this is the vegetarian and the non-vegetarian kind of a story. So what happens there is that if you look at the data and figure out the characteristic of a person who's likely to eat meat, and you target people who are likely to eat meat, and you accidentally reach out someone who's a vegetarian, and if he complains, there is a huge penalty on it.
Yeah, screamers might get rewarded, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But you can't blame the algorithm, because the algorithm has actually done the right thing by picking up the right people, but people with the same characteristic. So have you seen? So I had to put some rules on top of what the algorithm was telling me, and to fix that, and it saved me a few $100,000. Now, have you seen any of such examples where the AI bias actually helped in creating some value or saving some cost or whatever it is? Have you seen any kind of an example? Do you have any example to share with the audience?
Well, let's first start with the well-intended situation that didn't work out. The famous Amazon resume parsing.
Yep.
Right? Most of us know, and if you don't know, your resume is mostly nowadays, when you submit it, certainly of LinkedIn, etc., done with ADT and those kind of tools that basically automatically detect components of your resume. So it doesn't matter how much colorful and sexy layout you did, if certain keywords and certain connotations are not in there, or you were over 50 and you told everybody you graduated really young and really early, and when you were like 18 years old, and you put the date in it, right? All these algorithms would and say, this guy fits, this guy doesn't fit, this woman fits, this one doesn't fit. So Amazon said, yeah, but it's really unfair, because I might actually really have a good candidate, and they just fall out of the fact that we find them too old, or we find them too this, so we need to parse the resumes better, which was really good. So they say, let's take people that have been really successful with us, right? There's nothing wrong in that thinking. And let's feed those models to the algorithm, and let's create a neural network. And in this whole model, we create a bunch of associations, connotations that basically, when the next resume comes through the filter, predict success. And we took some other successful people and say, hey, look, they were picked up by the algorithm. And this is where it went wrong. Because again, in the 90s and beginning of the 21st century, our field mostly dominated by men. And you do not just need to have the gender, the kind of school you went to. Some colleges are female colleges only in the US, the kind of school you went to, the region where you went to, the employment you had, your employment history, all these things would tell actually a lot of things that would identify your racial, certain names, right? If you were progressive, left Afro-American, you definitely would go to certain naming. There's been popular naming as well. Think about Duchamp and Latoya, etc., and that automatically would identify an individual, like, oh, this is a very popular Afro-American name, da-da-da-da-da. This is a very typical name we now see in higher educated Afro-American coming back. And okay, we'll take the name out. Yep. Okay, after the name out, we'll take the schooling out. And then there's nothing left in the resume anymore to do it. And in the end, they had to shut down the whole thing, because they had to so far go back to retrain it that they couldn't get the bias out, right? Yep. So I'm just sharing this so people realize it isn't as easy, because this was really well intended. How can we help our recruiters to spot suitable candidates faster, and don't let these people wait too long about a possibility that there is a match for them at Amazon, right? There's nothing more painful when you apply for a job and you're waiting, and you get the famous, we wish you good luck in your career kind of letter, right? So
no, but to add to that, I think what has also been happening is that lots of recruiters are doing a kind of a search on the keywords and trying to figure that out. What the problem with that is that it's not matching the right talent to the right job description, and I think we've discussed that in the past as well. Is changing the or putting in the AI, removing the AI bias out of it, going to help in that particular situation?
Well, I think actually it needs more AI bias in it, to be honest. I mean, one of the things that concerns me is I'm now getting daily several recruiters, and thank you again, I feel honored, giving me what I call entry-level job in business intelligence. So either I do something wrong with my LinkedIn, or there's a lot of sloppy people that just say business intelligence, this location. And of course, job specs are absurd. I want a guy in there or girl in the midst of their 20 with 30 years experience. And, I just saw this thing like, we're looking for somebody who's executive position in this cloud company, and you need to have 15 or more years experience in cloud. Like, I think 8-9 years ago, And we still called it SaaS and not cloud. We still were trying to invent the platform and how to price it. And in 2014, slowly we were going there, right? And we went like from on-demand computing to information on-demand and SaaS applications, right? Yeah. Wow. People, do a little bit more than 5 keywords, right? And this is also where AI actually does a good job. It could actually help you filter out. Say, I'm not looking for these words. I'm looking for these concepts. I'm looking for people that show dynamism. I'm looking for people that clearly are passionate about business intelligence, the way they articulate that in their post on LinkedIn, that have some credibility and experience in the field by employers or job role at companies that justify them. And I think they should be earning around this amount of money, or this is what I'm willing to pay. Find them. And in that, a good trained algorithm can actually really do a good job. And so people of LinkedIn, when you're listening, call us. Anyway, so call us to make your algorithm better. And this is a little bit the concern that I have, right? We are at one part talking about the AI part, but we're forgetting the amount of mistakes that are being made without AI. And I don't know, but if you're a recruiter and you just basically start bombarding everybody who's a real professional in the field, like you and I are, about, so what do you think? We have a really nice company car. We give you an entry-level salary. You'll do the Northwest Territories of Australia, Shelley. What do you think? We'll start with that. We have a really nice starting AI toolkit or data analytics toolkit. Nobody heard of us. We would love you to be our new sales rep for business intelligence. You're like, really? Well, I mean, it could always be a second career, right?
No. I tell you, I get these emails saying that there is a data entry operator job. Would you be interested in doing it? So, yeah, I will.
Oh, man, I haven't seen those job ads in an age.
That's my dream job. Anyways, okay, guys, all those people watching this episode, guys, if you've got any experience where you thought it was the AI bias that has gone wrong, and you know that you've experienced it, then please share that in the comment section. And I take all the questions and I share all the experiences that you guys have. So please do that, and I will take them in the audience Q&A or the audience comment section. Okay. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please press the subscribe button, press the bell icon. If you're watching it on LinkedIn, please follow me. If you're watching on Twitter, please follow me. If you're watching on Facebook, please like and share this to other groups so more and more people can learn from our guests today and in the future. Okay, Marc, how do you think that the bias impacts decision making, and why is it such a big problem? So if you were to articulate 5 or 6 different areas which would be impacted, what were those?
So first and foremost, bias itself doesn't influence decision making. It is you and I and our overconfidence in technology.
Yep.
Or our lack of information balancing training that makes it. Let's go for 10 seconds to decision making before we go to your top 5.
Yep.
The amount of people that drive a car on a GPS and then take the staircase with their car beside the central station in Amsterdam has led that the city had to put some of those anti-tank barriers there beside the building, because make a right, make a sharp right doesn't mean make a right now and go down the staircase. It means pass the staircase so you're still on the road and make a right. Right? So the blindness that we have to automated instructions like a talking navigation system is still a very good example that we as human beings need to stay critical, and we are not always that. And what I always tell my kids is like, so when the navigation system doesn't work, where your phone is out of battery, how do you know where to go to? What are your markers, etc.? So we've lost some skills. I did a whole TED talk, the 500-hour job, a few months ago, on how we have empowered a whole generation to lose their information processing skills. They look at page 1 of Google, they don't even look to page 2. They don't ask the question different anymore. And this is a failure of our schooling system, maybe even a failure for us as parents. This is really the most important, because once you are critical in your decision making, you will get a series of bias thing, and you will do what they do in the medical profession. What is the best of 5? How did you come to the answer? And you have like a triage kind of system in your head to question that, to detect the bias. Now, at the same time, when we're under time pressure, right? Do I go left or right? Do I do this or that? We can be the best critical thinkers of this world.
Yep.
And we still, on the spot, have to maybe second, like, okay, I just have to trust this. This is better than, I mean, educated guess, right? It's like flipping a coin. At least this is a coin being flipped for me. And we hand over our responsibility to that bias so we can blame it later. It wasn't our fault. The system told me. Right? We all know the famous, and if you don't, you should really search it up, the famous clip where the computer says no. Right? It's not about the computer. Use your brain. Crying out loud, use your brain, right? But the other part is common sense. Everybody watching, if common sense was really common, half of us would be out of a job, at least.
Absolutely.
So let's be grateful for it. Now back to the top 5. So bias is the most dangerous, of course, in life and death situations, medical situations, right? Bias is known bias, right? Can still be good if you know that, and you can actually deal with it in a medical situation. Well, I know this was actually only for women or for men. I know this was only for this. The second is bias in profiling is much more risky. The thing is, there are almost no white gorillas, right? When I was a kid in Barcelona, there was one in the zoo, but there was one. There are a lot of black gorillas. If you make an algorithm based on the structure of a human's Homo sapiens face, your algorithm in the rudimentary version will be very similarity to a gorilla. And we know the cases that you Googled basically on gorillas, right? And you got black people back, or vice versa, or a gorilla was. And that was, I mean, it sounds funny, but it was really offensive. And a lot of people found it offensive. And it took a while before algorithms, not just Google, was a lot of algorithms that did this, figured out like, hey, we need to figure out a way rapidly to a guy who's fully bearded and a gorilla, right? Had there been white gorillas as well in this world, it would have been much more spotted, because the first training examples, I take a picture of myself. So I don't want to make this racist. This is an ethical thing. Unfortunately, gender and racial bias creeps in a lot of our language and a lot of the use of the algorithm, because our training data is. So the third bias that you see is, for instance, in a lot of historic patterns, right? We know that the future isn't the same as the past, but if we use historic patterns, we use the past to predict the future, but actually we're predicting the past under other conditions, right? So not realizing that the world before or after 2008 was different and using a financial model has an incredible impact on things. Taking data, how people made phone calls before smartphones, before 2008, 2012, that period, will get. So sometimes models are built on premises of older data, historic data that was accurate. It just doesn't apply anymore. This is a third kind of bias that we need to look at. This comes especially in behavioral models and in financial markets. This comes back. I think the last but not least is the famous association models, like because you like this, you like that. And let's take your vegetarian thing, right? Let's say your wife is vegetarian and you're not. So when you do shopping, you toss in just an extra steak for yourself, right? But it doesn't mean because you and your wife use the same customer card that your wife needs to be bombarded with steak offerings. It's offensive for her. Then again, for you, right? So if we take Netflix prediction algorithm, most of us don't use specific users, my user, your user, right? Even if it's your user, it depends if you watch, if I'm in Australia, you and I watch something, or you with your wife, you watch something. Right, so your behavior is so contextual that a one-size-fits-all algorithm doesn't work. And to make this really clear for people, let's say you are a shoe manufacturer, and you need to create a market demand prediction algorithm. And this is the famous joke of the two sales guys that go to Africa. The first guy calls back and says, "There's no market here. Nobody wears shoes here." And the second guy calls back like, "Oh my God, great opportunity. Nobody wears shoes here," right? Same original data point. The guy goes to a rural village in the midst of Central Africa, nothing to do with the most civilized part of Africa, sees some people walking barefoot, said, "Great market, no market." They're both right, or not. So
Now I'll tell you, you mentioned shoe, and I think Adidas, and I'll name them because I just experienced them last week, has actually done something very similar. So we went to Costco to buy something, and we had stack of shoes lying at Costco, and you won't believe. Usually, I have a problem with the shoe size from. You have got number 7, 8, and 9. They had within 7 or 5 different variations.
wow.
So they had 42 1x3, 42 and a half, 42 3x4, 40 and 43. 43 1x3, and so forth.
It's but that kind of mass customization and basically assuming you sell at volume, right? That there's some data behind it to come to a conclusion that you're going to produce that and sell that. So
And tell me, one of my friends who went with me, he also has number 8, but I bought 42 1x3 and he bought 42 3x4. And
what I find incredible is it's incredible that a company like Adidas does that, right? And at the same time, you say it yourself, it's at Costco, which does mass volume sales, etc. The point is always when you're a smaller manufacturer and you don't have these kind of channels, how do you find out what your customers make, right? There's been a long discussion about one-on-one customization, using data of customers' preference, etc. Because let's take that example of your shoe size, right? You now are really happy with it, but you want your next shoe, but you want your next Adidas shoe to fit like that. And they're not going to do it for every model, for every shoe, right? And if that one version of your perfect size is sold out next time at Costco, how are you going to get it, right? It's not like, hey, I'm looking for Angel's Envy whiskey. Who sells this online in Europe, right? I mean, it's Googling, and sooner or later you hit one and you get it. Though it's like, I'm looking for this specific shoe in this specific size. Of course, there's one dude on eBay that says, "Oh, I have this shoe, but it's going to cost you $600 instead of the $100 you pay because it's unique." Right? It opens all kind of new opportunities. But I think we need to go back for 10 seconds, right? Going to the topic is the accountability of algorithms. So if we use, right, AI, and this is the word that most companies hate, governance. But governance is nothing more than a series of rules and principles. Simple principle in data is like the person who creates the data. So I have a customer on the telephone and you give me your data, and screws up, for a better word, is the person who cleans the data, or at least the department who cleans the data, right? So it's if I have 3 versions of Shelley and I need to merge them back to 1 version of Shelley, and I notice that 2 of those records clearly have something that Shelley, when he put in his own data, doesn't say, or isn't the official address or whatever, right? And like, dudes, don't do it. That's a simple example of governance. And governance around AI requires some ethical guidelines. And most people do that, like, oh, it's something fluffy. We get Bob or Mary. Mary's an ex-librarian, and she's dusty and stuffy, and she's almost retirement. And why don't we get her to do that? That's not how it is, people. Right? It's the more you go to your example of the shoes, that you provide personalized content, right? You have to realize that if you do something wrong, you have an incredible negative impact. Like you get less social, less happy customers, less tolerant, right? And we see this in algorithms on social media, because these algorithms are weeding us out and biasing. We get actually less social, less happy, less tolerant people in articulating the views. Bring this back to a product. Bring this back to a product and say, even if you lose some lightweight AI solution, right? How do you build, and I'm really happy that the EU and the US government is looking at AI Accountability Act. How do you build in the principles of transparency, bias recognition, and so forth? And especially train your people to figure out how to deal with hidden biases, right? And of course, the hiring tool is the most simple example, but there's so many things. Like one of the examples I worked with 5 years ago, which sadly those examples still had, is you buy a house in Brooklyn. And you're like, great, make good money, work for SAP, great company, good employer, won't just be kicked out next week just because somebody has a breeze or a sneeze or whatever. I like the apartment in Brooklyn. It's great. I can go to New York, etc. And then the bank says, "Oh, I'm sorry, Shelley, but 20 people that lived in your apartment, they defaulted in the last 10 years. Therefore, you won't get a mortgage." You're like, I'm having good income. I'm having a solid employer who vouches for me. I'm having cash on the bank. And they'll get, no. And on top of it, what they won't tell you, you have a funny last name for us. Not Indians, but for our system, for our English-based system, you have a very funny last name. And therefore, your trustworthiness goes 20% down.
And to be honest, it may be true because my second name is pretty common, and if you look at the kind of data volumes that will come in,
oh yeah,
it can be the reason behind it. Well,
it can be worse, It can be, all these things like Clear and Global Entry and Privium and all those kind of systems that we rapidly cross the border. So
yeah.
one of my buddies, he's American, he's from Pakistan descent, his last name is Khan, and his first name combined with his last name, unfortunately, resembles with a person on the blacklist.
Same with me. I tell you, I have this problem at airport almost every time.
Right.
And I learned, and this happened funnily 3-4 years ago. 4 years ago, I go to Singapore, just walk through, no problems. I don't know, something happened. And now every time I go to Singapore, I have to give myself 1 hour because they will make me sit in the lobby and find out stuff about me and then let me go. So,
it's I know what happened. Last time we were in Singapore, you made a joke about statistics. You said, I remember, because you made a joke when you said, we should always bring our own bomb with us because the statistical chance there are 2 bombs on board, right? And you made a joke. Some device overheard you, screwed for life. But okay, but more seriously, right? I mean, this is a funny statistic example, but the reality is like there's some model that says, well, it doesn't matter that you're in all these safety and clarity systems, your name still resembles that, you're still born in this country, so stand for 1 hour in line. And you're like, dudes, that's not how I sell life. So I think we should just be realized about that algorithms and artificial intelligence we're still really in the early beginning stage of how we use this. And a lot of productivity is going forward. But it is time we need to start using our brain. Maybe we should be careful in making things fluffy, right? It's really funny when you say, well, there's an ethical development framework, and people are like, oh, fluffy, oh, well, it doesn't make money. If you say, hey, this is a governance model when you develop application that makes sure you don't have F-ups and that you save a lot of money in apologizing to your customers. Management says, oh yeah, no, please do that. Please don't make us embarrassed. This is a risk management approach to make sure we build mitigation into not basically offending our customers. Oh yeah, you should do it. Oh, we have an ethical framework for AI. Oh, just go to a philosophy class. I don't have time for that, right? It's so weird. The moment you talk about doing the right thing, everybody agrees. But the moment you name it, then they're like, and the moment you talk about, hey, we don't want discrimination, we want fairness, we want to make sure that diversity is treated equal in the way we deal with our customers. We want to make sure we solve hidden bias. Absolutely. How much % of the development cost is it going to be? How can you handle that? So it's weird, right? We have almost made dealing with societal and environmental well-being we have made it a bad word in business for most businesses to discuss, or it is a PR thing in business, like, oh, look, that's how good we are and take care of the society. But so what do you do? Tell me about your algorithms you use. Tell me about your framework, right? So in the end, it's very simple. Accountability, responsibility, clarity.
Okay. So now let's do something. Question or a thing to do for you and the audience. For you, Mark, you were mentioning about the name of the book. Can you put the name of the book in the comments up there in the platform? It will go to all the platforms in one go, so everyone can have an access to the name. And secondly, to all the people who are watching, I'm going to introduce my next guest. In the meantime, if you can share your experiences on bias, then put that through in the comment section. Please like this video on Facebook and share it on other Facebook groups if you can, so that more and more people can learn from this particular discussion. And if you're watching it on YouTube, press the subscribe button and press the bell icon. If you're watching on LinkedIn, please press the follow button. I will very quickly bring in our second guest. So one company which focuses on AI bias is Samata.ai. Now, Samata.ai is a startup that uses artificial intelligence and knowledge of cognitive biases to enable balanced decision making, leading to outcomes that are profitable and inclusive. They do this through their proprietary algorithm that identifies human biases in AI training datasets. Our guest today is the CEO of Samata.ai, Siddharth Murlidharan. Siddharth is the founder and CEO of Samata.ai. He has 14 years of experience in consulting and analytics, and has worked across large organizations as well as startups. With an engineering degree and an MBA from IIM Ahmedabad, his focus area is on solving cutting-edge problems in AI and analytics, which impact real-life decision-making in organizations across the world. So let me, without any further ado, introduce Siddharth Murlidharan. Hi, Siddharth. Welcome to Artificial Intelligence Insight series. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are y'all?
Brilliant stuff. So, Siddharth, what made you start this organization? So tell us about your journey, how it all started. I've given a bit of background, but it'll be great to hear from you.
Absolutely, and thank you for that, Shailendra. And I think for you mentioned the number of years of experience that I've had in the space, but focusing specifically on AI and bias, I think this was a problem that became quite near and dear to me sometime last year. As the proliferation of AI really started impacting a lot of my client base, a lot of things that I was doing, and this seemed to be a problem. And as Mark had mentioned a little while earlier, a lot of companies sort of know that this problem exists, but if it's fluffy, they just don't want to they just don't want to get too close to it. But so that actually got me thinking in terms of this is a very huge problem as AI gets bigger and bigger in the world. And organizations need to use AI right the first time. If an organization uses AI, it has a bias, it causes a negative impact from their customer base or from the users, they stop using AI at all, and that sort of closes off a path of improvement for them. So it's really right. It's really important for them to get it right the first time. And an unbiased AI system can actually be both inclusive and profitable. We always talk about ethical AI in terms of a regulatory framework, but for me, that's just the visible part of the iceberg, if you will, right? There is a lot of use of ethical AI to actually improve a lot of your top line and bottom line of the organization itself. So that entire combination, along with, of course, the fact that as a problem is extremely interesting to go after, I think that is the combination that really set me on this journey.
Mm-hmm. So when you said ethical AI impacting the top line and bottom line, what do you mean? Can you just elaborate a bit more on that?
Yeah, absolutely. right? So I know that Mark, you had mentioned the example of recruitment in with Amazon trying to use AI and so on. With the current system, right, you just have recruiters punching in the bunch of keywords, and that's what you were actually discussing some time back, and that will take a certain amount of time. Right, it takes X number of recruiters, Y number of days to really come up with the kind of profiles. Now, if you use AI to actually shortlist those resumes or those profiles to whom you want to speak to, that actually reduces your time to hire. You're able to get people into your system a lot faster. I can give you another example. Let's say, let me take the case of banking and
Yep.
with loan applications, right? And with AI, you typically train it on historical data, and somebody has made a judgment call in the past saying you live in this zip code, or you are a person of color, or you have this particular income, therefore your loan application is either approved or it is denied,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right? And that bias actually works in both ways, right?
Yep.
I could, as a loan officer, I could give a loan just because the person is a white male in his 30s, but that individual has not had a steady job for a long time, is living with his parents, right? But just because the other cognitive biases fall into his favor, he gets the loan, which actually increases the riskiness of the decision itself. And on the flip side, the same thing as a person of color who could be holding a steady job, but just because is living in a slightly more non-segregated zip code, or or checks a few of the other boxes, is denied a loan, and that's actually a potential customer that you've lost
Yep.
because of the biases that your system has, and that actually does really impact your top line and bottom line as well. So those are the things that we're actually trying to uncover here.
That's a good one, actually. So, guys, whosoever is watching this episode, guys, live, there are more than 35 people watching this show at the moment. Guys, please, if you've got a question for Siddharth and Mark, please put that in the comment section. Or and also one more thing, if you think someone is going to benefit from this conversation, please put that name in the comment section. If you're watching on LinkedIn, and tag them so that so that they can learn from this discussion as well. So, a question to both of you now, Mark and Sid. Um, how does bias enter the AI space in itself? So, Mark, I will start with you, and then possibly Siddharth, you can add on that.
Sure.
So bias partly enters the AI space unconsciously, right? One of my friend Twain, she has some really good examples of, because we use in English, our language is very binary. This goes back to Greek philosophy, Aristotle, etc. If you take other languages like China, they are composed things, so they're concepts together that make a new concept. We have, over time in our culture, associated words with things. So, for instance, the gender bias is very simple. Men are strong. We say about a woman, oh, she's a strong woman. It's already an exception. And it gives a connotation to a person. Well, men are supposed to be strong. If we say, oh, a man is very gentle, in touch with his feelings, right? It's an exception already, because it's a female concept. We already have a lot of words that are in our brains, in our language use, associated with genders, etc. So if you look for power jobs, you will get pictures of men.
Yep.
You won't see pictures of women when you go on image of power jobs, which is really weird, right? Because I know pretty much some powerful women in power jobs as well that way. So the other thing that plays a role there is that language that we use, we have been using in documents that we have been feeding algorithms, search engines, etc., etc. So this is how bias creeps in, basically, right? And when the bias has been creeped in, the second part is going to be the examples that we gave. So we start de-biasing, right? There's a great article I'll show to put it in the comment section in a few minutes. It's called Lipstick on a Pig's De-Biasing Methods Covering Up Systemic Gender Bias. And I already see Siddharth smiling. So I'll reset the camera when I stop talking, by the way, guys. But what we then start to do, we start hiding the bias instead of fixing the algorithm, right? Or fixing the data source or tweaking the balancing wave factors. And the problem is, just because we hide it, we haven't taken the bias out, or we actually have still a Bebo model. Bias in is bias out. And as long as you do that, you get a series of business consequences that are capital inefficient. So one, bias comes already from the way we use language, associations, jokes, statements. Hey, I'm half Dutch. I mean, the connotation in American language, going Dutch, Dutch uncle, Dutch street, etc., they're not really in my favor, right? I actually reminded everybody when we set up the IBM Watson office in New York, the streets here have a name. This is former Dutch territory. Just remember that, right? For 80 years, this was Dutch and all your values come from that. And they always laugh, etc. But it's my little personal attempt to reset the connotation with the words. But that's not how it works in a digital mass spread information age. So it starts with gender and racism and or gender and race biases in our language.
Mhm.
And then it starts with connotations and associations that are historic. And it goes on from there. Siddharth, I'm sure you want to chip in. I just saw you nodding a few times there. That's
Yeah, that you're absolutely right, Mark. It really chips in from those associations. But for me, what it primarily boils down to, and I think you all had mentioned this earlier, is in terms of how there is so much of how much we view technology and AI as this omnipotent, all-knowing piece of technology, and we rely on it blindly. And a lot of people look at AI that way and trust all those decisions. But to me, when I look at AI, it's almost like looking at a child learning from its parents. Now, those all those learnings can be explicit, like don't do this, this is bad, this is good. But the child also learns from how the parent themselves behave in certain situations, how they interact with people. To me, that is AI. It's actually learning from its human parents. And the moment its human parents make a particular association, it sort of imbibes that as a rule in itself, and it makes it a rule of its own, saying, okay, this is how I should react in that situation because, hey, I trust my parents because they are also doing the same thing. And that's how it just ends up perpetuating and amplifying all of these stereotypes, all of these biases into what is actually just unemotional system. But it just ends up with all of those things because there is that blind trust in the way that it has learned and it has been taught. And that requires a lot of undoing, right? Which is where the biggest problem ends up being.
But don't you think that all the algorithms that run are based on the data that is fed into it? So it
Mhm.
can only learn from what it has been fed with. So
Yep.
what happens in a situation where it's new to the model? How does that particular model react in that case? I don't think it knows how to react. So how do you solve that problem in terms of uh, in terms of bringing some new situation to the algorithm or to that AI
Yep.
robot or bot or whatever it is?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things, right, I think AI ends up giving for any decision-making system, AI ends up giving a much higher accuracy for the recommended prediction, and it will work. Where AI tends to fail normally is in it does not give the user confidence because you're not able to explain why AI has recommended that particular decision or has made that particular choice. So high accuracy, low confidence, right? Now, the first step is say that if I feed it something, can I understand what was typically a black box model? Can I actually unpack that a little bit to be able to say, okay, I fed it some 300 things to say, okay, on the basis of this, on the basis of race, gender, age, income, whatever have you, right? Give me a decision. What should I do with this person, right? Now, typically, it would just spit out an answer, yes, no, and that's about it. But let's unpack that a little bit, right? Let's explain the AI. So that's the entire explainable AI, which is the first step to say that. Can you tell me why you actually made that particular recommendation? right? Let me analyze that first. Let me see if that makes sense, if it aligns with, you know, with my own value system, if you will. It gives me the confidence that AI actually is giving out the right decision. And then you can actually see if there are any kind of biases which are there in that decision making. So for me, it's probably two steps. I first need to explain AI, make it a white box model or a glass box model to be able to say this is why it's making a decision. And then we apply a bias removal algorithm on top of that.
Yep. And I totally agree with you on that. But when you're doing these use cases across different industries and different areas, do you see any commonality in terms of the biases, or a commonality or any difference within the bias? So is there anything that you see? Well, you may look at different use cases and say, well, oh yeah, this is all the same in every case, or "Oh, this is different." So how do you explain that, Siddharth?
So, firstly, there are a number of commonalities across the use cases, because hey, we're talking about human cognitive biases, which
Yep.
is common for, every human has, to some level or the other, the same kind of biases or the same kind of stereotypes which are perpetuated. It
Yep.
can be in recruitment, it can be in search engines, it can be in insurance. So you have a certain level of commonality across all of these biases, which obviously forms the bedrock of the bias removal. But then, of course, you do have a lot of very specific nuances which you might want to retain in that particular use case, or you'll choose to remove. To give you an example, in insurance, especially for example in the US, the premiums do change with age, and that is legally allowed.
Yep.
You do end up making a different decision for somebody who's in their mid 30s versus somebody who's in their mid 60s. Everything else remaining the same, which you might be okay with. But are you okay with that in recruitment? Are you going to discriminate against somebody who's 50 years old just because of his or her age? Right? And that is something that we end up taking on a use case by use case basis. So you end up having specific dictionaries for each use case, but yeah, it is a cognitive bias, and some of those will remain the same regardless of the use case. Even healthcare of pharma, right? When who are you selecting for your clinical trials? How are you doing the diagnosis? Am I sampling it in the right way? Those things definitely exist.
So
But that's
what do you
that's
think,
also
Mark?
yeah. No, so I directly want to take the discussion with Siddharth here, because that's really a situation of values, right? It's one of my business friend John Havens from the IEEE did this phenomenal book, Artificial Intelligence, and he has this phenomenal question: how will machines know what we value if we don't or can't articulate and own what we value ourselves, right?
Yep.
Because
Yeah.
this is all about some applying some governance principles, focusing on transparency, how AI and predictive analytics come to an answer. I share the book titles that I mentioned as Shelley asked. I actually put a shout out to three people: Twain, Maria Lucia Accente, and Rob McCargo, who are together with John Havens tops in this field. I shamelessly put my Forbes article in there because basically, yeah, it's shameless self-promotion. I know, but it's actually all about why values for data matter. And I want to go back to Siddharth instead of me yapping. So one of the premises that I have, like if we by 2022 will have 50% of our business processes fully automated, fully end to end. I mean, in 2019 it was 30, right? It's going to have an incredible impact, especially in AI-powered robotic process automation and AI infusing in projects, etc. And it's a phenomenal double-edged sword, right? Because at one part, it's going to give us effectiveness and efficiency and all these things, but it will also amplify bias.
Yep.
And companies must ask critical questions about ethics, and they always talk about the quality of our data and how do we have unintended and intended biases. But what lacks, in my perception, are two things. One, the technology to recognize it. Back to Siddharth in a second. And the second is a I don't want to use the word framework because it's one of these things that most managers will kill on before it enters the room. But some notion, some ingrained notion, how do we actually apply our values, right? And this is more than just an explain button and a best of 5. It is really about we need to treat our data as an asset. If data is important, we need to treat it as an asset. We need to, same way as we do inventory, fleet, and manufacturing things. And that means we need to have the same principles. If my principle for my car says, you will treat your car like it is your own, then we also have to say, you will treat your data like it would be your own.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. And you wouldn't want to bias around you as a person. So make sure when you treat customers' data or you make models, right, that this doesn't happen to you or anyone either. And that means you need to act today. And it's really nice to have some guidelines and governance, etc. But the reality is in the values that we articulate. Yeah. How do we make that important? And then, of course, most managers says, and this is a question to Siddharth, and come back to what you're doing with your company. Yeah, but I don't have the tooling and technology to do that. It's a great philosophical concept, but it's so hard. Mm-hmm. So Siddharth, and then you say, ta-da.
Okay.
And actually, this is interesting that you actually bring this up. I was actually on a call with a think tank, and when we were talking about bias in AI, and I think one of the first things that she asked me was, this platform that you're building, can it be used to do harm, right? And while I mean for it to do good, right? Can somebody just say, hey, this is a way for me to actually exclude a certain set of people? Right? And how do I really and how do we really ensure we don't allow the platform to be able to be used in a way where it actually causes harm? So there is that amount of governance, a certain amount of flexibility in which I say, look, maybe you can't choose all the biases you want to remove. I will tell you these are the biases. There is an ethics board, if you will, which sort of decides these are the base level of biases to be removed, so that there is not that much of flexibility in terms of doing this thing, right? So that's that's probably something which we are considering, to your point, Mark.
Okay. Sorry, Mark, you want to say something?
No, I'd like to hear more about the product actually and the approach that they're following.
Yeah, so let's talk about the approach that you follow, Siddharth. Explain what your product does and how is it useful and how does that work?
Yeah, sure. So firstly, right, I mean, we have spoken about biases across a number of use cases, a number of industries, right? And the fact that while there is a base level of cognitive biases which are common, each use case, each industry ends up having its own set of nuances. So to begin with, our approach is essentially, let's take it use case by use case, right? And let's just focus on a few things for now, right? To begin with, let's start with recruitment, let's start with insurance, and let's start with banking. And let's just keep our focus there. And over time, we'll get to search engine optimization, digital marketing, healthcare, and so on. Now, so that's the first step. Let's just limit it a little bit, at least for 2020 and the next few months of the year. Once we did that, right, for each use case, there is, of course, we start by looking at the data itself, right? Is the data clean? What sort of data are we getting at? Can we ingest it? In what format, right? So if it's resumes, can I ingest a PDF, a Word document, a flat file? Have that kind of data ingestion capabilities and data prep. Or maybe it's even images in the case of insurance, where I get images of the car which has been damaged, and can I ingest that? What are all the different data types that we need to analyze? Once that is done, we end up running our own AI models, which is an AutoML approach, very similar to the Data Robot and the H2O.AIs of the world, but it's just having that thing that, let's run the data through our own set of models, see which is the most accurate in terms of the decision making, and how we can replicate it from historical data. Now that's the first part. That's just the prep part of it, right? It's only once the models are developed, that's where we run AI explainability, using sharp values, using counterfactuals, and so on. Just try and give an explanation for every decision, then at a group level, and then of course at a global level, right? What are the biggest features impacting decision making? And that actually throws up a lot of very interesting correlations or concepts, right? Which is to say that, for example, in insurance, um, if you own a red color car in the US, I can tell you with 99% accuracy you are a male,
Uh,
right? And it actually throws that up. So you can actually say, okay, you know what, I don't want gender in my data set, and that's a bias. But hey, you have the color of the car, and if it's red, that's a proxy for your data. So that's where we actually get into a discussion with the user to say, okay, you have actually taken these are the features which are the most important for the model. These are what we think are the biases. Do you agree? Right? Let's try and remove those biases. Right? Once we agree on those, right? And this has to be a two-way street, at least initially, until we're able to build up those set of bias dictionaries to a complete level. That's when our own algorithm comes into play in terms of bias removal. We have a bias removal engine which says that these are the biases that we've identified, to be able to, to say that I do not want these to impact my decision making. I want it taken out. And we actually de-bias the data set from all of these biases which are run. We see the impact on the output itself, right? And sort of see that there is an impact in the output. There is a lesser amount of discrimination. And that's what we then use to run and train a completely new AI model as well. Right? And we know that, and we do also check about on all of these things through fairness metrics, right? Which is to say that everything else remaining the same. What is the impact that just this one feature, that the fact that the person has a red car actually means that the claim will be approved versus the claim will not be approved? And that's how we're actually able to sort of make that difference and show it in the outcome.
okay. So do you have, is it a product in itself? It is an online or a product in the cloud? How does it work? So if someone engages with you, what do they get?
So the way we typically engage is, firstly, of course, we run a proof of concept or a pilot, right? Because everyone will say that, look, our data is different. We have our own nuances in their own data, and which is true to a large extent, right? So we first take that data, analyze it for the biases, for the explainable AI, show them the results. Now, once that works, this is something we actually deploy onto the cloud or on the client's own tech stack, and make it available as a SaaS model for them to use. And that's just a constant recurring thing on a per record usage. And the reason why that's important is because also I think, and this is something which we haven't spoken about so far, is that the bias and bias removal is not really a one and done thing. I might get new data in, right? There'll be newer customers which are coming in. Then you will end up seeing a lot of biases that creep in over time. And it's very important to actually monitor all of these newer data sets which are coming in, which are being ingested, and see if there is actually a creep of biases, or maybe some new biases which have come in as well. And then we sort of keep on making it a continuous improvement process and make sure that the model accuracy still remains the same.
Okay. So what kind of benefits have you seen with your clients? Is there, if you want to share some numbers or some percentages, please do.
Yeah, so I can share one. Maybe I think the others are still bound by a couple of confidentiality clauses. But for example, in the insurance space, we were actually trying to predict claims and whether a person would actually claim in the subsequent time period. And what we actually found, that there were actually 10%, and that's a fairly significant number. 10% of decisions was something that we found to be inaccurate, and that actually needed to be changed. Where you said that 7% of the people who you said will claim, we are saying will not claim, because you said they will claim only on the basis of these three biases, on terms of their in terms of their occupation, in terms of their gender, and in terms of their location. And we said that no, these 7% will not claim. You should actually retain them as customers. And 3% actually flipped the other way, saying, look, you just said that they won't claim because, again, of these three biases, but they will claim it. So you might want to just change your premium accordingly. So that's a very significant number, I think, because if you're looking at a 10% change, that's actually a fairly huge amount.
Okay. Okay. So, what being a startup and starting in this day and age, what kind of challenges have you found out? And when you're building up and starting with something which is a fairly a new concept, what kind do people understand AI bias? How does it work?
Uh, well, so firstly, of course, starting in 2020 has its own set of challenges, and I won't get into that part. But there are, I think everyone understands AI and bias. The challenge where it ends up being is that, oh, you know what, it's not that big a problem for us. There is that gap in between perception and reality, saying how bad is the problem, right? And I think that's where we actually have to show, it can impact you in XYZ number of ways, to be able to say, look, it can impact you here, it can impact you there. It's not just a problem of compliance and regulation. It's actually a far bigger problem. And that's the hurdle, I think, that we end up having to spend the most amount of time in crossing. But once that is done, and they're able, and our clients are able to see that value, then the rest ends up becoming a little easier.
So Siddharth, you started Samata.ai.
Yeah.
I know there were a few questions for the name of the company, so I'm going to do it again. Samata.ai.
Yeah. Actually, Samata.
Right?
No, Samata is actually Sanskrit for fairness or balance.
Well,
So I think that
so
was
my Sanskrit basically improved today again. Fairness. I liked it. I liked it. That's which explained when I started looking that I got a lot of other languages with the word in it when I was, so I had to quote the .ai, but it's a great name. Now, you started with targeting your approach as a company. You said, I'm going to go for banking, I'm going to go for insurance, I'm going to go for recruitment.
Yeah.
So every time when people have a startup, I have this like, what's the problem you're solving? What's the real problem you're solving? Not what is the micro problem you're solving? What's the bigger picture problem? What's behind the problem that you're solving, the real problem? Second, that I'm always asking them is like, okay, so how do you make sure that you target your product? And we've had different startups in this talk show talking about killing your darlings, taking things out of the core, stay on track for what your clients want. And the third is that I always have like, which industries are you going to make it different, or which functional areas? And you chose banking, insurance, and recruitment. So I think there's a bunch of people that like to know, like, how did you come to those? Because with all the sexiness in retail and CP, etc., you made a serious choice for those industries and those processes.
Yeah. I mean, so the choice of those is also, I mean, it's a combination of where I think there is a high amount of impact that can be created. Because let's say if you're looking at retail and you're talking about recommender systems, right? People who bought X are more likely to buy Y, and so that's, the impact there is probably something slightly lesser as compared to say, hey, these are the people you gave a loan to and these are the people you didn't. I think the impact for these particular industries has the potential of being a lot more. And also the second point, right, is in terms of as a startup, when we are trying to build out the entire platform, data availability is actually a constraint that I have to take into consideration, right? And getting, say, for example, healthcare data is actually a lot more difficult than actually getting our hands on recruitment data or insurance data. And so that also did drive the decision in some way. which ended up saying, okay, so first level, where can we make a bigger impact in a shorter period of time? And then with that, where can we get data a lot more easily? Because rather than spending 12 months in chasing after healthcare data, I would rather show the impact in 3 months with insurance data. So I think that it was a
Right.
combination of those two things.
So and that makes sense. So who do you pitch? If you, I mean, you come in a company, you knock on the door, like, yeah, I like to talk with the CEO. They're like, yeah, everyone likes to talk to CEO. By the way, CEO knows nothing about technology. Please don't bother him. Like,
Yeah,
which is not really true. CEO needs to have contextual understanding of
yeah,
technology, the impact it has on the business. But before you go there, you need to get a few internal sponsors, people that are willing to say, when we talk to some of our senior management and we'll pitch your approach and you're working with you, and it might not be the CEO, but at least somebody senior enough to own this, this is your pitch. How do you go in and find your internal sponsors? Because this is not a, hey, I have a ready-made product, I'll plug it in, go. I mean, has an incredible value. We're at the beginning of the hype curve of Gartner. So you have a lot of evangelism to do. And although the market is fluffy here, there aren't that much concrete products to, oh yeah, I get what you do. So
yeah,
and this is not just about you. This is about a lot of startups that come with a great invention at the beginning of a curve. I always compare it to the post-its, right? Who
Mhm.
wants papers with glue that doesn't stick permanently, right? I mean, you have to explain it, but you can reuse this. But I don't. Once I've written on it, I can't reuse this. So you have to fully, and once people see it in action, they say, oh. So how do you do that? How do you get your foot in the door with your first clients?
yeah.
So,
So
sorry,
basically,
just to add to that,
yeah.
so in the C-suite, do you have a particular sweet spot that you start with? So do you start with the chief um, human resource officer, or the chief innovation officer, or the chief technology officer? Who do you start with? Who do you think
Yeah.
loves you the most?
I think one of the first things that we've of course learned this the hard way, is that we are not actually selling the technology.
Mhm.
uh, and I think that's where we had faltered initially, where we sort of targeted the CIO organization, but we're not really selling the technology as such, right? Google can do a far better job of selling AI, right? What we are selling is the use case, right? So when I say, look, I can get you applicants faster, I can tell you in an unbiased manner which loans should be approved and which should not.
Yeah.
So that so once that realization actually hit us, it sort of made our first go-to point a lot easier, saying we are actually selling to the business and not to the CIO organization. And so that's the first step. So now, and that will of course change depending upon the use case, right? So let's say I'm targeting Accenture or maybe hey, SAP, where there's a large number of people who need to be hired on a daily basis. I will go to the CHRO there to be able to say, look, can I help you in sort of getting the right people faster? If I'm going to banking, or I will actually go to the underwriting team to say, can I tell you how to make it a lot more efficient and a lot more profitable. So that's the shift we have actually made. Rather than sell the technology, we focus on selling the use case, and that's the steps we sort of take from there. That will be a first point of contact.
Okay. Where do you see the platform going in the next 2 to 5 years? How is that going to move, and where?
Sure. So I think so. Like I said, as of now, we're focused on these three, on these three use cases, and once we build that out, we'll sort of extend our learnings and make it a lot more faster to onboard other use cases, be it marketing in the digital marketing, healthcare, pharma, maybe even hey, infosec or even criminal justice, right? And that's something which there can be a lot of use of an unbiased AI model, and so on. So that's the step in terms of of onboarding a number of use cases, and also to make it a lot more self-serving and automated in case that I don't really require a lot of manual intervention, and sort of make it almost in the product terms from an L1 system that it is right now to an L3 system in say 3 years from now.
Mhm. Okay.
But
Okay.
but it also means this is also not just in discussion with Siddharth, but also to our viewers, right? You need to target organizations. You have this roadmap. You're here. You want to be there. Siddharth says in 3 years' times. You can't just go to the market and knock on every door, because not everybody is going to be mentally ready, or, as they say, has the right of maturity model of using technology.
Yeah.
So the first thing, if you do things like that, and if I take your space, Siddharth, is I would go for companies that already claim to have a clear data governance. Companies that have executive ownership and executive accountability around the data governance. And the best way to figure it out is really you go to all the list of seminars about data governance and data ownership and chief data officer. And the first is, does the company have a chief data officer? Does the company have executives that talk about data on bigger events? And that's how you make your short list of companies, because what you're doing, your technology is so reasonable, new, and very limited competition in the market at this moment, right? You need to wedge into the first adopters to make sure that sooner or later you go to the upper right-hand quadrant in Gartner. Meanwhile, you're struggling with the fact that those that sell hours, the consultancy company of this world, whether it's TCS or it is Deloitte or Accenture, etc., they're going to say, well, we'll have an approach. You don't have to buy a tool, because the tool doesn't get everything. That's true. Humans also don't get everything. It's mostly humans and tools together. But when we have humans, and they will every time we go to your models, just take a subscription on our consultants and pay hours by the hour, right? And some companies rather do that. And some companies rather go with technology such as yours and do their own people. But coming back, the substitutions are partly experienced people. They can't scale, but they definitely can be there at the beginning of the market. Your second competition is substitution by companies that are larger, SAP, Microsoft, Salesforce, that will basically start sooner or later embedding certain models of technology as you have there. Again, there's your head start in time. So in order to build your brand, you need to rapidly focus on those companies that are, I like to do best of breed. So I like to have multiple solutions that are all the best together. I already have a culture on data governance and executive ownership. So I have chief data officers, or we have regular speaking we ask for. Or these are the poster child examples that always the PwC, the Accentures, the Deloitte, etc. use. And, oh, this is a really great company. I'm like, yeah, you're really great, but you don't have this. And at the same time, you need to avoid a product pitch, because then it becomes feature. You need to go philosophically. That's a lot to do for a startup. It's an absolutely winning strategy. There's a lot to do. So for the people viewing at that, how do you make sure you stay focused? How do you make sure you and your team stay focused at this moment? Because you don't throw slack.
No, that's actually true, right? And you're right in terms of the first thing that when I have a short list, it is to say that look, I am targeting companies who are analytically mature or who are data mature with those governance frameworks that you targeted. So it's not that automatically limits it to say maybe the Fortune 200, maybe, if you will, and only in those industries that you're focused on. So that first gives me a very specific list to go after, right? And so I'm not distracted by what's going on with AstraZeneca, and can I go there? I can just focus on that in the top 200, right? And to be honest, right, there is also a difference in the maturity of AI adoption across the number of regions in the world, right? I'm based in India, but I don't see too many Indian companies adopting AI anytime soon as compared to, say, organizations in the US or in Western Europe. So that automatically limits our focus, and just have that laser focus to say that this is my target market, at least for the next 18 to 24 months and not deviate beyond that, right? And once we do that, the second thing, like you said, it's not a product pitch. It's not, okay, I have my AI models check, I have an XAI module check, and so on, right? What is the problem? Right, we actually go in and say, what is the use case that will that will give you the most amount of value first, right? And let's solve for that. We'll expand later, we'll figure the rest of it later, but let's start with the use case that gives you the most value, right? The moment that we just narrow it down onto that one thing within these particular industries, I think that helps a little bit to be able to say that, okay, you know what, let's just target that, not worry about the rest, which is just noise at this point of time. We'll get to that later.
Okay. Any questions, Siddharth, you have for both of us?
So yeah, essentially, right. I think also, I think you also mentioned, like, in terms of substitution, right, Mark, where you have a lot of technology players, like including SAP, who could come in at a later date. Uh, how much of an AI focus is there, for example, right, especially within SAP, given your experience? What is your view in terms of, how do you see this particular area of ethical AI progressing?
Wow. This is a little bit, I have to be very careful to not do a shameless plug there. So when Shelley asked me to post some of the book titles, I went a little bit overboard. Beside the two book titles, I actually shared SAP's AI ethical framework. We released this in 2018. We improved this in 2019. We've given input. Some of my co-workers have given input to the European Committee. I've been personally involved with a bipartisan committee in the United States for the whole federal data strategy and a fair AI part. So we are very serious about it, right? 77% of the world's transaction goes to SAP. So there's a serious responsibility to that. Our approach is first and foremost in the development, so the way to do it ourselves, and giving the framework and the support by how do you do ethical AI to those that want to use our intelligent technology packages. These are technology widgets that go under SAP or connect SAP with non-SAP parts, or our lifetime management tooling around data science models, our data intelligence product. We are not in the business of the model itself, although when you look to our analytics products, before they were even AI powered, already had that explainability button. How did you come to the answer? Trace back through the model. Interesting, if you ask my colleague Richard Mooney, who was responsible for that, he would say, yeah, but maybe 10-15% activate that option. So we build it in the product, and you can literally have, bang, here's digital boardroom, bang, here's a business object dashboard, bang, show me, this is business intelligence where we even talk about, not even AI yet, show me which databases, which files, which folders, how did you get your query there? And with AI, we try to, what was the data, what was the data trained on, what's the bias, what's the confidence, what's the accuracy, and all those parameters could be shown.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand that to a normal daily user, you won't give it, but to a citizen data scientist, to a power user, right, you would normally give that. And I'm actually surprised, even when we do so much work, that most clients say, yeah, no, that's the last 5% of my development budget, not going to do it, not going to customize it, not going to put it in. I'm like, it's out of the box. And still, they don't activate the option because it's too much work to train people, explain it to people. So we live this, and it's pretty frustrating. Now, what we haven't done is we haven't taken over the model development itself. And this is where we come in, of course. What we do with data intelligence, we say, hey, we connect to your Jupyter notebook, to your Anaconda, to your environments. You bring in your Python, your R, etc. SAP analytic cloud models. You bring them all together. You run them in SAP analytic clouds. And we make sure that you can go one step back. If you conclude that there was a bias, and then you go back to the previous version of the training, or you get another data labeling set. So we actually look at the development workflow, how it comes to SAP, we haven't come to the point what you do. I'll be fair. That's not a matter of weakness of strength. It's a matter of strategy, right? We also do rapid application development tooling. So one of the reasons, of course, that Shelley invited you, right? Because Shelley and I, viewers, continuously come like, who do we want to have in 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks, right? And then I was like, I have one. And then Shelley, no, I have one. I want to have Samata. I want to have Samata. It's like, Shelley sounds great. Let's have Samata. Let's have Siddharth in. So when Shelley came to me and said, oh, I have a real cool one, I was like, wow, that's very complimentary to what companies like ours do. And the question for the SAPs or the Salesforces or the Microsofts of this world with our solutions, right, is, of course, how far do we go beyond the cloud application, right, where we're focusing on, and how much of our own development efforts are we going to do in this tooling? And this is also a focus point, right? We are rolling out, for instance, our industry cloud, which means we have decided not to make one cloud for retail and one cloud for CP. We have said, like, whatever you run your cloud on, whichever hyperscaler or SAP data center itself, we have one cloud that allows multiple industries to be there. So if you're only doing CP, you activate the CP. So you get the APIs and you get the data model and you get the data settings. But you can use the retail parts as well, because that's basically, those industries are so much integrating CPs that are selling straight. And then, of course, you can run your models and you can use SAP's data intelligence and basically do your lifecycle management, like, hey, I have a next version, I have a better version of the model. And yes, we have the frameworks about it. But how far do you go in your strategy as a company to say, this is not just important, you need to fix this, right? And an example is, it took SAP a while to go in, what was it, 2012, 2011, maybe even before, to embrace master data management as a solution. Until that moment, we said, that's not our focus, that needs to be done by the market, right? This is how you get your data in. SAP already has an MDM. But of course, an SAP acquired other products, and we had this like, ooh, there's now too many modules that can actually create the same data part, or people can create multiple versions of one data in our database. We need to start fixing this. And this is the moment we say, okay, we need to build and acquire components. So I think, Siddharth, it's a matter of maturity in the market. Before companies like SAP say, this shall now or later or then be a component of it. Or it's a matter of when best of breed works best. And sometimes if you become a standard, it's better for companies like ours to say, no, we support technology tool standard X, because it will work also with the other model. Because not necessarily do I make models only for SAP. I make models based on my data and my analytics, and that goes out. And that brings me to the second part, which is really important to Siddharth's question. People are like, wow, but all this reputation of especially 2000, 2012, that if you were in consultancy and you had an SAP practice, man, you made oodles of money because a customer bought SAP, and then they went into you and said, you are special. I was like, yeah, like everybody else. No, you are really special. Let us do more consulting work to hack and smack and customize SAP than you actually paid for the original software. Make it free 4 times. And every time you need an upgrade of the software, we'll do this. And now companies have come to the conclusion, say, we actually like standardized process because our customers and our value chain uses that. So we're going to take the vanilla SAP out of the box. And here it comes. We're going to focus on 2 parts. We're going to focus on customizing the models that feed the data to reporting, to automated action, to robotic process automations. And we're going to focus on our data insights because that's the secret sauce of who we are. Enter AI and machine learning and model development, because now suddenly we're going to automate output of one data as the input of the next process, or reporting for decision making, right? Your models and your predictive analytics and your AI-powered analytics are becoming more important. Hence, the bias in those models is becoming more important. So back to your questions, where do we stand? No, we have taken another route because that was the urgency of the market. Yes, I see the need of what you offer coming up. I would be lying if I didn't, because I'm publishing articles and stuff about AI frameworks. We've been focusing on the evangelization of our customers, and we are figuring out how far we want to move the envelope to include this in our own tooling and technologies platform part, or rather work with third parties like you to do that. This is for a strategy. Strategy is always very easy when you look back and say, 3 years ago we made a strategy and that's how we did it. But when you look forward and you're in the middle of the ocean and you say, I really hope my sextant and my compass are working.
Yeah. That makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, guys, we got to get to the audience question and answer. So, guys, if you've got a question, this is your last chance to put your question in the comment section, and I'll take them just in a few minutes. Before that, Mark, your point of view, or your what do you have to say about Samata.ai? So, what do you think about that?
So, let's be clear, right? Siddharth wouldn't be in the show if we didn't love his concept, right? If we didn't like his approach, if we didn't like his product, right? We have the incredible luxury of choice. And that means, again, for everybody who knocks on our door, keep knocking. It's not that we don't love you, but we continuously need to look like, what is it that the people that tune in and make time to watch this show or rewatch this show like to hear most? What do we think is at this moment top of mind? That's about timing. And what do we think is a really important novelty or angle that you as a startup have done and what can other people learn from it? In that, you hit all three of those criteria. So we were super excited, Siddharth, that you're here. If I would get a point of view, it's not about the product, it's about the go-to-market. So the question that Shelley normally asks when I come with my point of view, like, what would I recommend, Siddharth? And I said, what I would recommend you guys is partner, partner, partner. Because whilst you are getting the top of your pyramid to come in the upper right-hand quadrant of a gardener to have an ability to execute on a vision, you're not going to be able to scale and deploy this yourself enough. And if you get 2 or 3 of the global management and IT consulting players in their data governance and their AI machine learning practice to embrace your startup's product as a tool that they can sub-license and do work with their clients. And first, it's part of their toolkit. And second, there's a condition if they leave it behind with their clients, that they run it for their client and they help their client to run it themselves. You will absolutely grow much faster than your competition. That also means getting someone aboard that comes from that world and has that network. Because knocking on the door of an IBM Global Business Services or a Accenture, Deloitte, a PwC, all these companies that are strong in this AI ethics part, right, isn't going to help you if you don't know who to call and if they don't know. Because I need to know either your product really well, I need to know you as a founder, or I need to trust the person that comes in. So a startup like yours, hiring somebody who comes from that kind of consulting world that understand how consulting companies partner with software players, it's going to be a really essential part to grow for you.
I understand. That's good advice, Mark. Thank you.
Good stuff. Okay. Now let's get on to the audience question and answer one by one. Very quickly, we'll run through. I'm sure we've got a few. I didn't have a look, so let's start. Okay, so there was Prapul Palli. Hi, Prapul. How are you? And Prapul is saying hi to Mark too.
Hey, Prapul.
Oh, he comes. He's regular. Actually, he comes every show.
I know. I love it that you're back, Prapul. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the love, Prapul. Next question. A question from Saket Kishore. Hi, Saket. How are you? He says, what could be the possible scopes of advancement of responsible AI?
Wow, Siddharth, you want to give that a start? Since this is
Yeah,
what you're
yeah, that's actually that question actually has the answer can be quite huge. I think we might need another show just for this question, right? But let me try and narrow that down, Kishore. Right, when you talk about responsible AI, what uh, to me at least, right? What is the basic purpose of responsible AI? And not just AI, but responsible AI. AI, of course, has its own revenue and efficiency gains and so on. But when you say responsible AI, it's to make sure that no one's really left behind because of the application of AI. And I think just with that one statement alone, saying, leave no one behind, any decision making that impacts people either directly or indirectly, any decision making has to be responsible AI, and that basically opens up the world for responsible AI, and that's what it is.
Mark, you want to have a comment?
So, I had the incredible pleasure last year to meet Helen Edwards, who's the co-founder from Sonder Studio in the US. And and I will put her name as well on the chat in a second. She has done some incredible work. She's actually from Shelley, your part of the world, but she's living in the US now. And it's always nice to have Aussies and Kiwis in our show where they live somewhere else. But what I really, really like in her approach is first, the human needs to be responsible. If we don't have responsible humans, we won't get responsible AI. The second part is there's responsible AI that aids us in what we do, and there's responsible AI that actually runs the thing without our interference, right? This is the dream. I'll give it, it corrects it, it fixes it. I'm a big fan of Star Trek, LCARS, much more responsible AI that deals with it, to Kirk and Picard, etc. Sadly, we still have the examples of 2001 and 2010 of the overzealous responsible AI hell, who was so responsible for the mission that he basically killed the crew. And because his mission was bring the people to Jupiter and take care of the ship. And it's like, darn, they want to go somewhere else. Why don't I just kick them out of the ship and I don't have to take care of them, right? Very responsible for the mission, not so responsible for Frank Poole and David Bowen. So I really think that we as humans need to grow our insight before we actually can grow responsible AI. That is my biggest concern, that we go too fast and we have too many self-autonomous algorithm going on. That it's a more philosophical answer than Siddharth, because I am not as bright as he is. And but that's the answer I could give.
Okay, so Saket is working for Cerner Group, and he is a software engineer there. I just looked him up. Next question is from Ramesh Gharia. Ramesh is the procurement manager at a leading automotive company. Ramesh, you watch out. One of our shows, we're going to talk about industry cloud in the automotive sector in coming days. So please watch out for that episode. So his question: Hi, Mark. Loving the discussion. We always do, Mark. We love the discussion we have with you. It's great to have you here. Please elaborate your views towards importance of business process functional expertise while heading to AI-related projects.
So I think the most important is, I'm not sure if I understand the question correct, so let me do my best. I think business process functional expertise is essential. If you look at data, you need to understand data in its context. So it doesn't matter if business intelligence, analytics, or AI, you're going to need a combination of technology people and people who understand this process, right? You also need people that can think outside in or outside the box and not say this is how we always used to do this process, but with the abilities of artificial intelligence, can I rehash and reshuffle this process? Can I take one step out and add one step more because the AI does that 2 steps faster than I would do that one step? The most important person that can actually spot the bias in the data, though, is that business process functional expert, because she or he will understand, like, this is not going to go well with my client. This is not going to go well in my supply chain, right? Reordering toilet paper every day in stacks of 10,000 just because there was a rush today isn't going to go well for the coming week of production of toilet paper, nor for the back office storage, or the back storage in a retailer.
Mhm.
Maybe this algorithm needs to realize that this is an exception and not a daily repeat, right? Simple bias in the model. You need a business person there. So my recommendation, if I understand the question correctly, is every project you do where you create an algorithm or deploy an algorithm, when you go to AI-related project, make sure that you get some people who understand the business problem you're trying to solve, but can also think outside the box from the customer or the supplier's point of view and say, if we would redo it all again with the things that I know that work, how would I do it? And not, this is how we always do it. Because then you start digitizing the form you made in 1995. You don't want to do that. It's
Okay. Next comment or question is from Ramesh Gadi again. He says, yes, I also read about Facebook's ads algorithm, which falls into this category while showing ads to a specific set of people and landed with trouble.
Yeah, I think the NYU Press book, the Algorithms of Oppression, gives a really good explanations over how that worked and why that worked and why it's so hard to redo that. It's a strong recommendation.
Okay, good stuff. Next question is from Vasudev. Vasudev is the managing director for Phytech Embedded Private Limited. And he says, thank you for such a great insight. How much AI would be moved or positioned in edge computing devices, considering need for response time, connectivity, and power is when number grows?
Around 7 kilos. Okay, more serious. And so first this is a sliding scale, right? Portable device processing power is still beyond Moore's law at the moment, so that's good. The more reason is, why would you do it? Why would you decentralize AI processing if you could have a cloud with faster deployment, faster spread, multiple locations, etc.? You would do it because of two things: latency and connectivity. I did a keynote at TNW 1.5 years ago about how we actually deployed in the Volvo Ocean Race. So just Google TNW Marc Teerlink, and you start with the Volvo Ocean Race, how we had edge devices on board. So the AI could actually help crew members during the Volvo Ocean Race to monitor and manage their own performance physically. When do I sleep? How do I do this? Since the Volvo Ocean Race does not allow you to have interactive connection during the race, you had no choice. If you're in a manufacturing plant with a mesh network that continuously produces on high speed, and you want to directly get a product out that has, for instance, a crack in the engine the moment it comes out of the casting, you want to grab it out there and not a minute later when it's already in the next step of the process, because the disruption in the extra cost would be an extra, a multiple factor at that moment. So you do it for latency, or you do it because of connectivity. And otherwise, you'll just stick to your cloud, because your maintainability, your training, your distribution is much easier.
Okay. Okay, next question is from Supriya Kulkarni. Hi, Supriya, how are you? He says, can you please mention the startup name here? And I'm so sorry that we missed it in the title. We need to do something about that. I think Siddharth's name is too long to fit in the name of the company in there. But for your benefit, Supriya, the name of the company is Samata.ai, SAMATA.ai. And you can look at their website as well, which is samata.ai. Okay. Next question.
We're gonna fix that in the YouTube title for the replay, right?
Well, it is fixed on it's in the comment section though. It is there, so people can watch it there as well. And on LinkedIn also it is there. I just checked. It also links back to your website, so it's working. but it's not working. It's not showing up on the comment here. Okay, Ramesh Gadia. Mark, SAP released latest S4HANA 2020. Where there are 60 inbuilt RPAs with AI on different processes. For example, one will get email notification with desired output of critical report with action plan.
Yes, and we're very proud of that result. It's the result of 18 to 20 months of incredible hard work. And again, I give kudos to the teams that did it. I can only say how proud I am about what they did. It's a very good example of taking standardized processes that you connect the output of a microprocess to the input of the next, so you don't have to type things over, you don't have to check something, that you only look at outliers instead of everything. A really good example is invoice reconciliation, right? Nobody becomes an accountant to go 3-4 days a week with an admin team to go 467 spreadsheet to match payments and invoices, right? So the moment you do this, right, and again, Ramesh, thank you. I can see you're a fan there, is you cannot just do the process. You need to tell people as an AI process, like, hey, this is what I did. What do you think? Do you approve me going forward? Because this goes back to the governance. I did this, I automated it, corrected if I was wrong. I did it, before I continue, can I get a thumbs up? I did it, can you review, even if it is automated pass, can you review where I need correction in my model? I did it, before I pass it through, you need to check my model because I'm not sure yet on these cases. And that's the new kind of notification and reporting we're going to get more in software in the coming years.
Brilliant stuff. So we've got a very engaged person in Ramesh for this particular episode. He's asked a few questions and he's got one more comment before I get on to the next person. Says Ramesh Gadia says, yes, Siddharth, even best practices in product design and model building will not be enough to remove the risks of unwanted bias, particularly in cases of biased data. Absolutely true.
Yep, absolutely. And that's, especially when the biases are not explicit and it's just hidden, it just shows up. You're not sure. You can think that there are certain biases, but hey, there are some times where, you really have to dig deep and question yourself or question the data to say, is this a bias or not? So absolutely, yeah.
Good stuff. Next comment from Rebecca Buckness. She says, thanks for another great show. And she's got a question. I think Rebecca Buckness says it is noted and appreciated that you, Shelley, have a show for women in data science. Thank you. However, in the inherent pre-existing bias against females articulated in Invisible Women, the book by Caroline Crider Perez, how can yours or any other capability detect and diminish such historical bias?
I'm gonna let Siddharth start with
No, firstly, that book is an amazing read. So I will actually join Rebecca in recommending that book to everyone watching. That's something that really, it can be an eye opener for a lot of us. It certainly was for me when I did read it, right? And I think the first thing is to actually, what we were talking about earlier is in terms of the values, right? Let's first acknowledge that there is a problem, right? And and have that intent to go about to fix it. I think that is really step one here, right? And then once that is there, once those values are in place, the technology exists to actually detect and fix these biases. But you first need that alignment between the values and say, this is what we want to fix, and that realization to me.
Okay. Mark, you want to add before I answer?
Well, you need to realize that a lot of things are not just bias, but also what I call a reflection of culture. So, and I don't mean that mean, but our way that we have done cultural representation is already different in Western countries among themselves. The difference between Italy, France, the Netherlands, and the US, right? How we associate. Just look to product commercials, right? Where do we use a woman to associate? I mean, there's no need for a scantily dressed woman to be in a car tire advertisement, right? There's also no need to have a incredible lower class, blue collar, redneck prototype in that same tire commercial. Doesn't say anything about the tire. The tire actually has three things, right? It is safe, it takes care of my car, it will fit, it's an affordable price. So we have chosen some cultural representations that we need to figure out if those stereotypes are there. But historically, we have used those stereotypes. So when you look to algorithms, you need to look to the cultural representativeness in your database, because that's what your algorithms reflect in service, right? And that means, one, avoid bias in, bias out, BIBO. Don't do binary classifications if you can. Make them contextual or make them multiple. Make your user interface in your database more culturally representative. That means your training data, but also the way you show it, right, has a thing. And then start flex examples of data and AI biases in social media or the data that you get. Because you also can say in your training, this is not how I want it. Because we always focus on trainer data, this is the thing. But actually training data like, in your model, this is a negative connotation in my model. This is a positive reinforcement. We should also have negative reinforcement, like we do not want this reinforced. The risk is if we let that model run too long, right, a negative reinforcement model, then we create another bias, and that is basically against a balanced and neutral set. So it is not that easy, right? It requires actually people who understand data science to do that training. It's a great question. By the way, it's a great book. I really, really recommend it as well.
And particularly to me, the question about, how can the capability detect and diminish such historical bias? Well, we can do it by practicing. So I'm trying my level best to have that show and bring the women in data science to the forefront as much as I can. It's now how many? 13 episodes gone. So I've been running that for more than 6 months now. If you look at it, more than 26 weeks every fortnight. And as I struggle to get more and more women in data science onto the show, I request you to find out anyone you think or recommend anyone you think should be on the show. More than happy to have them. And every fortnight, every week, there's a lot of work behind it to find out the right person who can come and showcase and talk about data science. We do that. So we're detecting those women and bringing them there. Hopefully that will diminish this bias against the women. And we have that question on the show. You were on the show, Beck, a few weeks ago. So yeah, we're trying our level best. So thank you for bringing that up. Okay. Finally, the last question is from Prabhu. And he's actually turned the whole thing around, and he's asked that question, how startups can be benefited by AI. So he's actually turned the title of the show and saying, how do you think? How can startups be benefited?
It's a really good one. I like it. I really like it. It's, well, depends if your startup is technology-wise or not, right? If you start technology-wise, AI is phenomenal in your development. Right, you can much faster create applications, platforms, etc., than you did 10 years ago. All you need is a laptop. You don't even need a garage anymore. There are phenomenal tools in Docker and in virtual machines that are AI powered. But it also requires, if you make a technology tool, that you need to start thinking about which processes do I insert AI and where does it make a difference. Now, the great thing is if you can do that directly with a debiasing approach, right, you have a phenomenal differentiation. Now, if you're a startup, you're not a technology startup, let's say you're a marketing startup, you still want to do something. You like your market study, your research, your presentation to your VCs, right? Anybody who's a little bit good in Google Analytics already can say, well, what are the keywords and the trends? It's not as good as NWAI that we have had on the show before, or other startups, right? But that we know in this. But if you just do Google Analytics, you do some analysis, you can say, like, look, My product is justified because the last 4 years there's been a trend in this. So a lot of AI-powered analytics can help you actually much faster to actually create the kind of documentation and create the kind of justification to your investors. Those are two things that I would say. Siddharth, how would you see that? You live
No, I think you're right, Mark, right? I mean, of course, in my case, I am a technology startup, an AI startup, so that's already there. But you can see the impact of AI. I think AI ends up leveling the playing field as well a little bit, especially with the constantly decreasing cost of computing, right, on the cloud or whatever, right? So it's not inaccessible for startups anymore, which may have been the case say 15 years ago when somebody wanted to actually use a lot of these edge cases. And that's something that can actually end up improving their go-to-market speed, improving anything, right? If it's a marketing startup, if it's a sales automation startup, and so on, it can actually bring in a lot. And I've seen a lot of startups, especially in India and Bangalore, actually use AI in all of those.
Okay. Yeah, from my point of view, I think startups, it depends on industry, as Mark said, industry to industry is different. But if you're using the technology, the accessibility today is such that, and lots of automation that has already come in. So startups can actually quickly start utilizing a lot of those components without investing a whole lot of money into a particular startup. I think that has become a huge differentiator in the last few years. And I remember I say that in all my shows mostly, that when I started my career, and Mark would remember that, in 1996, just to buy, I bought a 40,000 rupees INR, it would be $1,000, 486, which had 8 MB of RAM and I think no, it was 128 MB of hard drive, and I was a very happy man with a colored monitor, and I paid $1,000 for that. And today, imagine my phone is 8 GB of RAM. So the way the technology has moved in, and if you look at, I remember I used to be working for SaaS, and one SaaS pod was $250,000, and not anyone and everyone could actually access it. You had to work for a company to actually access technologies like SaaS or something like that. But today, you pay $25 on AWS or whatever, and you get a free hour installation on it, and here you go. And it's as cheap as chips. And so organizations startups can actually use and get the technology quite quickly and get there, which was absolutely very difficult in early days. Guys, those were the questions. Thank you, Prapul, for the question, and it was an interesting one. Okay, before we go, one phrase that you want to leave with the audience. I'll start with Siddharth.
Samata.ai. No, but yeah, on a serious note, right? And especially given the kind of questions that we have seen, I think just like to leave people with the thought that bias in AI is real, and that is something that let's not have a complete over dependence on technology, and at least be aware that such things can exist, and let's try and and therefore that will give us the ability to root it out as soon as possible. I think that's the main thing.
Okay, Mark.
I'm going to say two things. One, there were a lot of questions about how you troubleshoot embeddings and how you look at your original data. This is even the step before Siddharth comes in. I've taken the liberty to give a few links in our YouTube chat so people can look back to it, right? How do you actually, whether it is word2vec or it's debiasing to make words embeddings less sexistic in your original data, how you debias some embeddings, how you deal with your operatings and your word factors. These are essential parts. How do I clean my original database or training data? That's actually really where it starts. So I've given a few free GitHub links, etc., for people to play with. So they can already see themselves that their data sets that they work with are much more biased than you thought they were. So let's start with that. 2 points. One, your stuff is much more biased than you think. That's one. And two, if you want to bring such technology to market, you got a partner, because you need to create a movement to actually approach this. And you need to get a movement between consultants and technology players and some leading companies that gets a ripple effect for our industry. So in the coming 10 years, we accelerate debiasing our data. Because if not, right, we will get all kind of algorithms who are neither reliable, trustworthy, or accurate for what we want. And then the world is becoming a worse place. So let's be positive. Let's work together. Let's partner together. And I mean that not only commercial, but also spiritually in how we approach this.
Good stuff. Thank you, guys. Thank you, both of you, for your time. And I know, Mark, it is early in the morning. It's now hitting 9 o'clock for you.
It is coffee time, sir. It is double espresso time.
Thank you very much for your time, and hopefully, all the best for your hard work. And thank you for being on the show.
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
thanks, Sharon. Thanks, Mark. Because we're glad to be here. Yeah, and we'll talk soon. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone watching this show. It was a pleasure having you on the show. So, guys, that was Mark and Siddharth. It was a pleasure having them on the show, like always. And Mark is always great to have on the show. He's with all his knowledge and excitement that he brings to the show. It was great. And I hope you guys learned a few things out of this episode. If you like this episode, then please like it. Press the like button on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube. And if you're watching this on Facebook, please share it with other groups in Facebook so that more people learn from this episode. If you're watching this on YouTube, please press the subscribe button and smash the bell icon so that you can be reminded when a new episode gets live. And on the other hand, if you're watching this on LinkedIn, please follow me so that in future you get alerted when a new episode or new live is on. So thank you very much for watching this episode. It was a pleasure having all of you on the episode, and I look forward to seeing you next week with another episode. So bye now.